known her for decades now. Lois Capps has lived in Santa Barbara for since 1964. And
before you were born.
No, not quite. She's the daughter of a Lutheran minister. She earned her bachelor's in nursing at Pacific Lutheran University, and then a master's in religion at Yale Divinity, and then a master's in education at UCSB. She's dedicated her career to helping people improve their daily lives through better schools, quality healthcare, and a cleaner environment. Before succeeding her husband, Walter, and we'll have more to say about that later, but before succeeding her husband, Walter, in Congress, Lois had successful careers in both nursing and education. She spent decades as a school nurse in the Santa Barbara Unified School District, where she established a teen pregnancy center and was active on many social service boards. Her experience in education and healthcare deeply informed her 18 years of work in Congress. She was a respected leader on issues of public health, passing legislation to address the national nursing shortage, detect and prevent domestic violence against women, which is something that's not addressed enough these days, to curb underage drinking, improve mental health services, provide emergency defibrillators to local communities, bring CPR instruction to schools, and provide immediate Medicare coverage to patients suffering from Lou Gehrig's disease. She has also been at the forefront of efforts to protect the environment, leading efforts to stop new oil and gas drilling off our coasts, to eliminate new oil drilling in Los Padres National Forest, and protect consumers from shouldering the financial burden of cleaning up MTBE contamination in their water supplies. That's the additive that's in unleaded gasoline. She was also a leader in gender and LGBTQ issues, as well as efforts to make college more affordable. Lois retired from Congress in 2017. She's grateful to return and engage locally full-time with the community she loves. She is the proud grandmother of 9. She loves music from the 60s and 70s, but she says that Nat King Cole is her lifelong favorite artist. Lois has a lovely singing voice, and she used to sing along in the car when their family was young. Music was a big part of their household. Her late husband, Walter, was also a musician. And so everybody, would you take this moment to welcome and say thank you for Lois being here?
Thank you. All right. Take it away, right?
Yes, please.
Well, thank you, Pastor Moore. That was overly gracious to you. I go back to those warming centers with Big Ed. That's what I remember as well. But it's an honor to share this morning with you and with your congregation, and embrace the music and celebration that you've been having so far. And so I don't want to interrupt it, but my theme is coming from some what is called the Sermon on the Mount, from a couple of verses from the book of Luke, chapter 6, verses 43 and 45. And these are words from the Good News Bible. A healthy tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a poor tree bear good fruit. Every tree is known by the fruit it bears. You do not pick figs from thorn bushes, or gather grapes from bramble bushes. A good person brings out of the treasure of good things in his or her heart. A bad person brings bad out of the hidden the treasures of his or her heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And it's that last sentence that Pastor Moore prompted me to consider this. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of. The scripture came to me when Pastor Moore reached out to me. We had served on a panel, four of us, for a discussion with Great Panthers on the wisdom of elders, which I suggested really should be elders finding wisdom, as we all try to find. On that occasion, I remember Pastor Moore's comments on speaking from the heart. And that touched me that day and carried me into my comments today. And then it came like a gift, a short piece it has a picture, which I'll share with you, from the Independent. I don't know if that calls to mind what they talked about in the Independent, our local newspaper, about your people's pantry, fashioned from a filing cabinet picked up by Julia Longo and Alexa Pazel. And they copied it now in a couple of other places in the community. And the title of the article touched me. Take what you need and give what you can. What a model to live by. So I thought to myself, what are the moments that have touched me in my life? I'm now of a certain age. And I came to mind 3 or 4 little snippets or pictures from my life. As David, Pastor David said, my father was a pastor, and it was the Lutheran church, and our family being of Norwegian background. And he lived a very long life of ministry to others. And I was very privileged to be at his side when it was his time to go to the other side, to relinquish life on this earth. And he took his last breath, and as he did so, holding the hands of those of us in his family who surrounded him, and he looked at us and then with labored speech, he said, family, that's the most important thing. It's all about our families. And by family, he meant those we love, those who love us, who nurture us and nourish us and heal our hearts and help to sustain us. This is what we do in the community of saints. God's gift of love comes to us this way. Then I have another image that comes to me. Pastor Virgil Cordano was the Franciscan pastor at the Old Mission for many years. And some of you may remember Father Virgil. Our children were young, and we used to take them to Fiesta Pequeña. You remember at Fiesta time, the first night on Wednesdays would be outside on the steps of the Old Mission. And Paula Lopez, who used to be on television then, our local station, and Father Virgil would MC this gathering of local talent. And Father Virgil struck me with one theme he used to talk about. As he looked out on the big crowd on the steps of the mission and stretching across the street, he said to us, you know, God is more present here amongst all of us on the lawn than he is back there. And he gestured back inside the church. God is with his people. And then came to me another image, and it's the beloved community has already been referred to today, but I was privileged to serve in Congress with John Lewis. He was from, as some of you may know, a very small town, Troy, Alabama. But when he was 21 or 22, he marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And I was able to march across that bridge that day with him. And joining us was Martin Luther King. And he spoke of the beloved community, crossed that bridge, and he crossed it, they crossed it together, and it's continued to be a tradition even today. Crossing bridges as a beloved community. And finally, there is a gentleman I admire, a spiritual leader named Parker Palmer. I heard him speak, and he touched me with his movement, leading from within. And one of his most powerful images to me was that of standing in the gap. He used to talk about, we are called to stand in the gap. And this is what he said: the deeper our faith, the more doubt we must endure. The deeper our hope, the more prone we are to despair. The deeper our love, the more pain its loss. And before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. And now with those little vignettes or snapshots, I'll turn it over back to Father Moore, Reverend Moore, to lead us in some questions. I'll have to wait for you to unmute.
Thank you for those inspiring words, and I think we'll all have something to take with us through the course of our day, and so I appreciate that. For everybody's benefit, Lois and we came together on some questions. Actually, I gave her a long list of things to consider, and this is what we came up with. And so buckle up, everybody. I want to, well, let me come on with you. So considering our country's geography and demography, oh, you know what, before I ask this question, let me just say, part of what got this going is that I bought this book, which probably is hard to see, but the title is The New Religious Right. And of course, it's not new. This book was published in 1990. The New Religious Right, Piety, Patriotism, and Politics by Walter Capps. And first of all, it wasn't that easy to get the book. It's out of print, and there's just no excuse for this book being out of print, because I actually bought one. I found one at a used bookseller, and when I was about 20% through the book, it fell apart, a used book. And so then I had to buy another one, and because I wanted to persist, because I found it so enchanting how his personality really comes through. I mean, I know a little of his personality because I was a UCSB student in the passing through the religious studies department. But he's such a, gosh, he's got a dry sense of humor, a real humility. But I really wanted to get through it because it was prescient. Understanding what's in this book in 1990, you can really see a lot of what we're experiencing today coming to fruition. So here's question number one. Considering our country's geography and demography, to what extent do you, Lois, see the religious right as an instrument of social fracture?
Well, at the heart of all of our decision-making, I think it is what comes from our hearts that come out in the form of words. And we are divided as a nation. Maybe we always have been, but there are always, in my mind, the extremes of those who see things in black and white on one side, and some of us who, like Parker Palmer, see the indecision and the uncertainty and the shades of gray, because life is complicated and we have a certainty in our beliefs that carries us, but we can't always predict how things are going to be. And the question I am going to turn back to you, Pastor Moore, is, in this divided country, which is surrounding us today as much as it did in 1990, as much as it did when I first went to Congress, and there was the folks who called themselves the Tea Party, that we've always had division in this country. And what is it? I mean, I think we heard it in the beginnings of the service today. Who is it, or what is it that can bring us together so that despite that we can continue with our differences, but can we form a friendship and a communication that goes deeper than that? I think you have some answers in the way you worship together.
We certainly have some wonderful hearts assembled here. A lot of curiosity, a lot of questions among us, and I think that's what keeps us from calcifying and just, turning on others. So let me ask this. In your view, how do we recover from our state of fracture and move forward?
Well, I think the way the congregation has demonstrated already is the way that happens. We come together. We come together at warming centers, at food pantries, at a file cabinet out in front of the church or different places. And that's the things we have in common that bring us together. We all get hungry. We all need nourishment. And we find nourishment in love and relationships, no matter whether we come from the Middle East traditions or the Black traditions or the Puritan traditions. We still want to be nourished and nurtured, or as my father said, we are a family. We all know what it is to be in family, to have family that is broken, that we need to heal, to have family that rejoices and needs to celebrate. It's a common denominator we all share.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody else is thinking this, but you sound like you and John Lewis have spent some time together the way you're talking. Next question. What is your understanding of how the crusade to overturn Roe v. Wade became the foundational tenet of the religious right?
Well, this is a particular issue that's close to my heart, being a woman, being a mother and a grandmother. Also in my career or my work in Santa Barbara, I spent a lot of time working with young women and men who became parents at a very early age. And instead of dropping out of school, high school, as it was then, we found a place to nurture them and their babies. And it became such a wonderful part of Santa Barbara High School when I was there in the 90s, that the teachers who had small children would ask us, couldn't we bring our children to your pay center? We called it in those days. And I learned there that that when you The tragedies come, mistakes come. We take bad turns. We make mistakes as a nation and in our families, but we recover. We don't give up. We allow the healing to come, and we find ways to nurture each other and to bring forth even a more beautiful thing in the future. Calling together that which we have in common, rather than judging that which we disagree with, is to me, and was to Walter and to my father, the most important thing. We spend so much more time in judgment, it seems, than we do in touching and embracing that which we have in common.
Let me ask, what elements might we find in the history of resistance, grief, hope, and celebration in the Black church? How can anything there help us?
Well, that's where I turn to you. And I turn to the music that I heard earlier a few minutes ago. And that's what the great gift to me personally, coming from a very different tradition, are the beautiful songs, the spirituals that talk about the suffering and talk about overcoming. And John Lewis teaching me about the beloved community that can break down barriers, that can bring civil rights to the most hardened hearts. And that we've lost some of that. We need to recapture it.
Indeed. So let me ask, the religious right in the US is not new, but in his book, Walter suggests that the loss of the Vietnam War fueled a new kind of Christian conservatism, one that appealed to patriotism. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not sure if it was the Vietnam War, but that was certainly, those of us of a certain age can remember how divisive that experience was. And he began to teach a class at the UCSB. Maybe that was during some of your era there, Pastor Moore, that where he invited veterans themselves who, they were 18, 19 when they were drafted and sent to this place they knew nothing about, to a culture they didn't know about. And it was a traumatic experience, a terrible experience for these young, mostly men, but some women too. And they came back to the United States, and that was the conflict then going on, even at places like UCSB, where the bank burned and all kinds of things, demonstrations happened. Some of us remember those days. And they were spit upon. They were outcasts. And Walter invited them to tell their story to the young men and women in the class, whose students at UCSB weren't that much younger than the vets. And that became a healing process. In a way, it's an analogy to what is going on today. There are so many people who don't get to tell their stories of suffering. And I think about what's happened as we're seeing it with climate change, with hurricanes upon storms and fires. People's lives as we've known them, they're being torn apart, and we need to be open and receptive to being healed in a new way.
I don't know how many of us are aware or maybe old enough for this, but Walter's class made national news.
Yes, it did.
At UCSB, when he started inviting the young vets, and I remember, even though I wasn't extremely conscious at that time, I remember that in that moment, the war was pretty popular. We live in this hegemony where militarism kind of equals patriotism, I guess. So the war was still popular in that moment, as I recall. And so it was quite controversial for him. Am I recalling that correctly, Lois?
Well, the war wasn't popular among the people, but
Right,
we had committed, our government was very much involved. But it certainly did divide the country at that time. And I think in many ways, we've stayed divided ever since. The issues may be different now, but some people see government as a terrible bad thing always, and others find a way to say, well, it may not be perfect. It certainly isn't. There are ways we do need to come together and find meaningful solutions to issues like poverty and war and the atrocities that we see in different parts of the world.
Thank you for that. I'm going to ask one more question and then see if anybody else has a question. And I'm really hoping that Robina can raise something. But let me ask this. Walter's research presents various factions of the religious right as a kind of circular firing squad, where each faction denounces the other on doctrinal grounds. Would it be fair to say that the rise of Trump all but stopped those old squabbles?
Perhaps it focused us in a different way, but we now still have, I don't know that it's because of him. I think the fractures were always there, but why is it that he appeals or what he stands for appeals to certain people and not to others? I don't worry about Donald Trump nearly as much as his devotees.
Thank you. So, am I imposing, Robina, if I ask you to come on?
No, not at all. I find it fascinating. I have memories from when I lived in Santa Barbara of some of the things that you mentioned, Lois. But for me, I think having not been born in this culture, but having experienced the violence of it in all the places that other people live, I think it would be a good idea to not just talk about US policy and politics and its violence only from a national perspective. It reaches far beyond what people experience here every single day, and that should be part of the story as well. It's good to restore the vets that carried out the violence, were forced to carry out the violence, and then to bring them home and try to heal them. But what about all the places, the people and non-humans that were violated? You want to always make that part of the story. Why? Because the huge trauma, which is planetary, the huge remaking of the earth has come about through these kind of violent actions in history by the colonizers and by now a new imperial power as well. And what we've done is we've changed the earth and everything that lives and exists on it. And so this is not just one fraction of a story that we can concentrate on.
And this is what makes us the beloved community, because different ones of us are thinking of things that the other ones are not. And I really appreciate Robina's presence, and wondering, Lois, if you have any thoughts on that.
I think Robina is so on target and absolutely spot on. in her suggestion that the vets, some of them still suffer, but what about the other folks who do? What about the children who go to bed hungry in our own community, not just overseas, but we have all the seeds of what is fractured in our community right here at home.
Thank you. Might someone else want to weigh in at this time? Before we go to communion?
I've been toying around with how do we move forward? And even in local politics, even in local projects, we're seeing people get really entrenched one way or the other way. And it makes it almost impossible to talk to each other or to even get together. And so one of the things that I've been at least kind of exploring in my own mind is how can we change the viewpoint? And I've been thinking that each thing that comes up, each project or each disagreement, usually centers around a problem that wants to be solved. And if we could focus people's attention more towards, here's the problem, how would you solve it? And given the constraints, because every project does have a set of constraints, and usually people who are vehemently for or against miss some of those constraints and don't see them. And so it's easy for them to solidify their camp because they're not thinking about, well, and there's a problem here that we also have to deal with to solve this problem. And how do we get around that? And I don't know how to make that come about, how to make people want to look at things like that, but I feel it's really important because you can't move forward if people don't try to problem solve together. You can't just say no every time somebody else comes up with an idea.
So Lois, any thoughts on that? Thank you,
I
Brigitte.
just began to think about, as you were talking, and Brigitte, that's such a prevalent way to put it when you have a committee or a group of people that's trying to solve something and you can almost predict how the conversation is going to go. Some people on this side and some on that. I was thinking, what about inviting some different voices to join in? Young people, some of us of a certain age or within life experiences don't often appreciate or even listen to what young people, different people are bringing, can bring, and maybe they feel sometimes they are not invited.
Mm-hmm. That's a really, really good point, because I invited Jacob, who's in our group, to come and look at a project with me, and just crossing the street with him completely changed my viewpoint. It was like, wow. It didn't change my viewpoint, from one point to another point. It changed my perception of how he would see it.
Yeah.
And it changed my perception about other issues that are important besides issues that I cared about. And I was like, wow, I wish everybody had the opportunity to just cross the street with Jacob.
Yes, yes.
It was really different.
So let me ask Diane Fox, who has lived through a lot of the times that we've looked at today, what your thoughts are on this.
I was just typing to Robina as you say that. I was appreciating her comment that seemed to turn back on America, but in fact, my work has been with Vietnam for the last 30 years. My work the last 20 years has been telling the stories of people there who are still suffering from what is both a chemical and a metaphor for the long-term consequences of war, Agent Orange. And yeah, so I appreciate, Robina, your pointing us out to the rest of the world.
Okay, so I got to note that. Thank you for that, Diane, that I'm not loud enough. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So we see Jacob says he charges $10 if people want to cross the street with him.
Well worth it.
All right. Well, I hope we kept the door open long enough for anybody who wanted to weigh in.
I got real quick, Pastor Moore.
Yeah,
I have to
on,
say this,
it.
So I love this idea of community, the beloved community, obviously. And it is in that finding the common ground. I'm going to say this and I'm probably going to, okay, so the hippie generation, it was labeled the hippie generation, but that was the beginning of an awakening and the ability to think for yourself. And what a beauty it is today, because our future generation has grown up with that idea in its head already. And so it isn't the right or left. You know what? We're all on the same bird here. You know what? And to hear, I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for Pastor Moore, the generations that began the ability to become a free thinker and start seeking counsel with the friends. I love my community. We have so many different people here, and that's the beauty of it. We're different, and we make a whole, and it is a family, and that's so important to remember. Family comes first. Well, this is my family.
Yeah. And if we all thought the same, it would be a very boring family. and people would drop away. It's when we can engage with each other, isn't it?
Thank you for that, Clint. Alina, she leads the Planned Parenthood Action Fund board, and I bet you have some thoughts on our conversation today.
I was also reflecting on what Clint was talking about with drawing the connection between, I was born in 1981, so thinking about Vietnam era and folks who were divided at that time, and kind of the how where their political views are today, and kind of this kind of free thinking generation. And anyways, not feeling very articulate right now,
but yours is the generation that takes what mistakes were made before, what strengths there are from before, and the challenges of today seem overwhelming to me. But that's what you and that is the platform in which you are continuing to work. I remember when, I go back so far with Planned Parenthood to know that it was the conservative women in the community that actually started our local chapter. And it has shifted over time. Why it became the mantra of the religious right, I still don't understand. This is about women. That it tells you something about the importance of family. It's not just women either. How do we choose our family? How do we make it work for us? And to celebrate the beauty of what I think Planned Parenthood is as an organization in a positive way, rather than that big A word, coming right to the surface in the beginning. It's such a small part of what, when I see you with your young child, it makes me, that's Planned Parenthood right there.
It
in
is.
your
I mean,
living room.
I'm able to have the family of my dreams because I was able to have access to
course.
abortion care.
Of
Yeah.
course. And I worked, and not all of us have the dream come true beautifully.
Right.
And that's why we have to work, as I did, taking young women in those days to Planned Parenthood because they could go and they didn't know they could. But every generation has the challenges to it that we have. And because of the decision that this ill-advised Supreme Court made, makes us realize that as people, we'll bypass the Supreme Court. We'll go to the legislators and look to them to codify, to make into law that which we want to be there to protect you, Elena, and those coming after you.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yes, and a lot of women and their beloved men in between.
Thanks for all of your work.
Thank you for your wonderful work.
And we'll have two more. Diane is coming back, and then Kenny, and then we'll have communion.
I just wanted to ask, there's an organization that I'm on the email list for. I've never participated, but I like the idea. It's called Braver Angels. Maybe some of you know it. braverangels.org, and it purposefully brings together around hot button issues people of various points of view and facilitates a discussion that brings out the humanity. At least it looks like it does. I think it does. I thought you might
Wonderful.
want to know.
No, but that's exactly what we do need to find ways to do, isn't it?
Hello. Thank you, Lois, for all your work. I've worked a bit with your son Todd with common table things. Yeah, I mean, as I feel like so much of what we're talking about really has everything to do, and so much of my conception of what are the real like issues in our world. A lot of it seems to have to do with transparency and like how the actual systems and cultures of our world kind of pull us apart from each other. I would say intentionally so. And how sometimes the most, radical and loving thing we can do is to just break down the barriers between us and them, whoever they are. And it means showing up at a place where there's a free meal. It means showing up for populations who are kind of marginalized, put to the side, people with different disabilities, or even like hearing from elders as well, oftentimes kind of just put aside. It also means, listening, like coming close to people who you'd rather not hear talk, like that's exactly what it's all about. And, it's hard. It seems like a relatively easy thing, but even just to put yourself in space to hear someone different from you speak, and to hear someone who you probably have been taught that their perspective is unimportant or dangerous or something like that. But to actually put yourself in those circles and situations is not only an incredible way to grow personally, but also, I think, to grow our society. And I mean, that's actually, I suppose, exactly what the common table really is about. um, and yeah, it's kind of getting our human family together and talking and recognizing the commonalities that we have, and that the fears that drive us to do, all kinds of unspeakable things, the fears themselves are valid, but the behaviors are unjustifiable.
That's right. That's the crux is in those two different things, isn't it?
Mhm.
We all have fear.
Yeah.
Where do we take our fear?
Yeah. Do we let it lead us, or do we, work with it and work with it as a tool to further understand the world around us and people who seem to be in opposition to the things that we want.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, Kenny. Thank you, everybody who's participated, even if it's by listening and watching. I'm very grateful for everybody here. I'll say that as we go to communion, and which is very much appropriate right now, let me just say that I was Diane and I, we were watching Stephen Colbert a few nights ago, and his guest was Tyler Perry. And Colbert asked Tyler Perry something that he had heard and he wanted to verify. He asked Tyler Perry if it was true that Tyler, convinced Oprah that she was actually wealthy. And Tyler Perry used an example. He said, well, I saw Oprah, we bumped into each other at an airport, and I told her, you can afford matching luggage, right? Which I'm sure most billionaires can. The thing is that, they having grown up very poor and then being, really rich, had not made the adjustment. It took time to make the adjustment that this is who I am now. And so I immediately began to think about how wealthy I am with yourselves and people like yourselves in the world and in my life. And I began to think, because I was so not present, because I was so absent in the earlier parts of my life, I wasn't present for people. And so a lot of that is a blur, even with my family, because I did not honor their presence. I did not honor my own. But now I'm in this place where I see people. I am amazed at people. I'm in love with people. It's like I just woke up, and I just want you all to know that I consider myself a very wealthy man. And I hope you consider yourself wealthy when you look around and you see what you have in your life. And now we're going to go to Kenichi, who will close our time in communion.
Sorry, our Maya just sneezed and scared us.
That's the dog.
Yeah, it's our husky. Lois, thank you so much. We are so much richer because of your contribution and all of our conversation here. And as we draw near to the Lord's table today, again, the theme seems to be humanity, human race, how Jesus the Christ opened another way for us, taught us another way, what it means to be fully human and what it means to be connected to one another. And not only connected, but to realize that we are connected to one another. We are one human race. And so as we now come, and as we begin with the bread symbolizing his body, let us pause to remember this, that the Christ has made a way, and not just made a way, but has opened our eyes to realize that we are one humanity, one human race. And for it, we are all that much richer. So let's take the body of the Lord and let's partake. And let's take the cup and let's partake. Amen.
And